Hello everybody. Well, at the moment I am knitting a sweater on my brother KH-270 electronic chunky machine. I'm using the knit leader. But the reason I'm making this video is because I've just run into a situation here where, as you can see, ignore the feather duster, I've run out of yarn. Now, I don't like to knit knots in, and I wouldn't want to get halfway across this row and run out of yarn, or just splice this together and continue knitting. So what I'm going to do is I want to join my yarn at the end of the row, but because we've already started knitting, the carriage has already started knitting this row, we need to make sure that we're on the correct row of this pattern and that we have the right needles selected. Now, as I'm using the knit leader here, fortunately it's not gone past the tripper yet, but if you had, you need to turn the knit leader back either 1 or 2 rows. If you're using the chunky, both trippers are in working position, so you'd need to turn it back twice for every row unravelled. So what we're going to do at this point, if we look at the console, you can see it's showing it's going to select row 11 now. For whatever reason, the number on your screen, what you can see, is flashing. It's not flashing in real life, that's a steady number. So at this point, just so we don't lose where we are, we're going to press CR, and then the ready light will flash, and then that holds the pattern for us, a bit like locking the card on a punch card. So I'm going to get my yarn out of the way here. I'm going to make sure I turn both of my trippers off. Using the knit leader, if it's gone past the tripper, make sure you turn it back either once or twice, depending if your carriage has gone past with both trippers. Will depend on how many times you have to turn it back, on the chunky that is. If you're using a standard gauge machine, if it's gone past the tripper, just turn it back once. So at this point here, we've locked our pattern on the console, so we don't have to worry about that for the moment. And I'm going to unthread the contrast yarn here, just carefully anchor it out the way, and unthread the main yarn, and then I'm going to remove the sinker plate. And to do that, on either the chunky or the standard, once you've loosened the thumb screws, you just sort of lift up slightly and pull towards you, and it will come off. Next thing we need to do is take the carriage change knob to CR, which means carriage release, and if you lift forward slightly, do this carefully, and pull towards you, the carriage will lift off the needle bed. Now you can see our needles are all over the place here, so what we're going to do is push back the selected needles back to working position or B position, and any of the stitches that have gone behind the latches, I'm going to use a transfer tool and put them back into the hooks. Do this carefully. Okay. Now any of the stitches that have knitted, you can carefully unravel them. It's usually easier if you unravel the main colour first. There we are. Make sure you get that last stitch, it's usually a bit tighter than the others. And just make sure, oops, we missed a stitch there behind the latch. Just make sure that all your stitches are back inside the hooks. Okay. and then make sure they're all in line in B position. Sometimes you get this situation here. You see how the needles have been pushed down? That's the way the brother machines select needles. The carriage pushes down on these needle butts and it grabs a sort of a saw type looking mechanism inside the needle bed, and it pushes the needles forward. So just bring them forward to E position and they'll pop back up. But of course then you'll have to make sure they're back inside the hooks. Okay, so that's the knitting dealt with. Okay, now we need to make sure we're on the correct row of the pattern. So if you remember, we locked the pattern. If we just press the cancel entry button, the number will reappear. Now this is saying that we're going to be starting on selecting row 11. I don't want to select row 11 because I need to select row 10, which is what it was about to knit row 10 and select row 11, the following row, because brother machines select a row ahead. So I need to get the needle arrangement back as for row 10 of this pattern. So we're simply just going to press the down arrow so number 10 appears as a steady number in the display. Again, for you this is flashing on the screen, but in real life that is a steady number 10. So all there is to do now is, obviously my yarn is at this side, I'm going to put the carriage on the opposite side to select my row. Set the change knob back to KC and carefully slide the carriage back onto the needle bed, and just as it grabs the timing belt, stop, we need to pop our sinker plate back on. This seems a lot more long-winded really than it is, but I'm trying to show you this with one hand, so you know. Before we go any further, make sure both part buttons are pressed in, or at least the one in the direction you're going to travel, because if you don't, all this knitting will fall off on the floor. So we're set on KC, both part buttons are in. Trippers need to be off, so it won't affect our row count. I hadn't gone past the row counter yet, so I don't need to mess with that, but if you had, just turn it back one row. So now we're ready to select that row 10. Here's my other hand. And there we are. There's our row selected again. Our number 10 is flashing now. It's flashing all the time for you, but anyway, it's flashing for me. So when I go back the other way, it's going to knit row 10 and select row 11. And now I can go on to start my new ball of yarn. Because they were on the floor behind the table, I lost track of how much yarn I had left. But hopefully this video has been helpful to you. And yeah, obviously set your trippers back in place and set it back up for whatever pattern you were doing, in my case Fair Isle or multicolour. And yeah, we're ready to go. So hopefully this was helpful, and I'll catch you again in the next one.